In this video, we're going to be going over how to communicate from the client to server, server to client, from client to client, and server to server. So to do this, we have to use bindable events, bindable functions, remote events, and remote functions. So there's four things we're going to be specifically looking over, and they are pretty simple to understand once we go over them. The first concept that we have to grasp is what the client and server's relationship are. So essentially, you can think of the client as a kid and the server as a teacher in a classroom. Now, of course, a kid can't just grade their tests themselves. So the teacher would do that. But the kid would have to write his answers on the test. That's essentially how clients and servers work on Roblox Studio. So specifically in Roblox Studio, the client is the player's computer, and the server is, we can say, Roblox's brain that controls the game. Since we have a client and a server in Roblox Studio, we have two different scripts that we can add to our game. The first one is a normal script, which typically only belongs on the server side. The other script is a local script. And this script would only run on the client side. You can see that the local script is blue while the server script is white. The local scripts run on the player's device while the scripts run on the server. That is the most important differentiation from the two. For security reasons, we want to separate clients asking to do things and servers carrying out that request. Coming back to the analogy of the student and teacher, you don't want the student to grade their own tests. They might, give themselves 100 even if they earned a 50. That is like the same situation in Roblox Studio. You don't want the the functionality of currency to be in a local script because then the player can just give themselves $1 billion right off spawn. Alright, so the first scenario we're going to look at is remote events. Now, remote events are specifically for communicating from client to server or server to client. A common use of remote events is often seen in GUIs, and that's because GUIs are replicated on the client side only. So if I create a button on my screen, this button belongs on the client side, not the server. So if I wanted to click this button and let's say something happens in the actual game, I would have to use a remote event to talk from the client to the server. Let's go over how that would actually look like. So let's say in your game, whenever the player clicks this button, I guess a dollar bill would just fall from the sky. So of course this button, like we said before, is on the client side, but this dollar bill, since it's in the workspace and you can see it around us, it exists on the server side because all players can see it. So how do we communicate from client to server? Well, the first step is to create a remote event. And typically you want to have your remote event inside replicated storage because the client and server can access anything inside replicated storage. If you were to add it in server storage, then only the server side could get it. So we're going to create a folder and we're going to rename it to events. Then we're going to add a remote event. Also, replicated storage, it's basically, think of it as a folder that you can use, and that folder is, I guess, replicated on every player and the server. So whatever's inside here, everything should have access to it, basically. So we have a remote event, and I'm going to rename it to give money. So now we need to add scripts to actually use this remote event. Inside our button, which is in Starter GUI under Screen GUI, we're going to add a local script, and we're going to delete this. So the first thing we're going to do is get a reference of our button, and then we want to check whenever the button is pressed by using a signal, and whenever that button is pressed, we will fire our event that we created called give money. Alright, so this is our signal, and whatever code is inside here will be triggered whenever the button is clicked. But first, let's get a reference to replicated storage. Now, inside here, we're going to do replicated storage dot give money, or sorry, dot events dot give money. So dot events will get the folder under replicated storage. Dot give money will get the event we created, the remote event. To fire this remote event from the client, we need to do colon fire server, and that's all we need to do on the client side. However, if you want to add any arguments inside of here to be passed on to the server, you can. So let's say we want a random amount of dollars that fall from the sky. So we'll do math.random 1 to 10. So automatically the server will get this parameter. Alright, let's go on to the server side of this all. So similar to the client side, we're going to do something similar with the server side. So we're going to go in server script service and create a script. And we're going to delete everything. And we're going to get our replicated storage. Now, what we want to do next is we want to connect our event to our script, and specifically to the server. So if we do replicated storage dot events to get our events folder, and then dot give money to get our event we created, and for the server side, when you want to connect a remote event, we got to do dot on server event. And if you were firing this remote event on the server side to the client side, then it would just be give money dot on client event. And then we're gonna connect to a function. And as you can see over here, automatically the server side should have a parameter called player by default, no matter what. And then we're going to get our parameter of the amount of money we're going to receive. So this code right here just spawns the money on top of the player. But since we have an amount of money we can get at one click, we're going to put this in a for loop. So now we'll get as many dollar bills as money is equal to, which is our parameter we pass in through our local script. Alright, so let's try. So now or I guess that was two. $2 bills spawned on me because our math.random resulted in 2. So yeah, it works. So by pressing the button, the client sends a event or a message to the server, and the server responds by placing dollar bills on your head. Alright, now we're going to look at remote functions. Now they're fairly similar to remote events. The only difference is that you're waiting for something to be given back. You can think of it as like a conversation or talking to someone on the phone. When you ask a question to them, you have to wait for the response before you ask another one. So for this scenario, what we're going to do is we're going to click give me money, and we're going to make the server send a random number from 1 through 10 this time, and it's going to update the text of this button. So to start off with, in our events folder, we're going to create a remote function. And I'm going to rename the remote function to amount. Now back in our local script, we're going to delete this part. So instead of .give money, we're going to do .get amount and not fire server. .get amount, because that's the bindable function we just created. Now we have to use a different, I guess, phrase than fire server. We need to use invoke server. But this alone is not, I guess, useful. So we're actually going to create a variable on the left, and yeah, it's going to be called amount. Whoops. Local amount equals replicated storage.events.get amount colon invoke server. And that's because this line right here is equivalent to calling a function inside the same script that returns something. So essentially, whenever you invoke the server, there should be something that is being sent back to you. So this means that amount could be equal to 10, 5, 100, no one knows. For bindable events on the server side, we have to do dot on server invoke to connect to the bindable event. And if it was on the client side, pretty sure you can guess it yourself, it's on client evoked. So all this code means is that whenever the server is invoked, or whenever the client invokes the server, this function will be called that returns a random number from 1 through 100. And if you had parameters or arguments, you just add them here. Now if we go back to the local script, we're going to set our button's text to be equal to the amount we receive from the server. So when I click this button, the text should be replaced with a number. So as you can see, it works perfectly fine. Just a little recap, what's happening is the client is requesting information from the server. You can think of it like, oh, the client asks the server to give me a number 1 through 100. The server replies by giving a number from 1 through 100, and now the client uses that information to change the button text. So we have two different events left, and that is bindable event and bindable function. The last two are basically similar to remote event and remote function respectively. They do the same thing except they communicate from client to client or server to server. So let's go over how the normal bindable event can be used. So like usual, our event is going to be stored in replicated storage. However, since this is on the client side, you can technically have the event in Screen GUI, or you can have it under the button. It really doesn't matter that much because the client side can access this no matter what. But I'm just going to keep it in replicated storage. Okay, so using these events is similar to remote events, except for bindable events, instead of doing colon on server event or colon fire server, we'll do colon fire. Just that. Nope. Fire. And again, any arguments you want to pass would be inside this parentheses. So for the other script, I'm going to do the same thing where I start with replicated storage and get the event, the bindable event, except instead of doing colon or dot on server event and colon connect, I'm just going to do dot event colon connect. Whoops. Connect function. And inside here, I'm just going to turn off the button. So if I click the left button, this button should turn off. And as you can see, it did. So for a reminder, you can think of bindable events as if you were talking to someone in the same room. You don't need like a phone or some other like way to go past walls and to another country, let's say. You just talk to them directly, and they have access to everything that you have access to, essentially. So for our last event, it's going to be bindable functions. And just combine your knowledge with bindable events and remote functions, and you'll have the concept completely clear. So I'll just go over an example really quickly. Alright, so my event, which is also in replicated storage, is called get button text. Sorry, not event. Or a bindable function. Yeah. So I'm going to update the script, and I'm going to do dot get button text to get my function, and colon and invoke. I'm going to go back to the beginning of this line so I can set the button text equal to whatever this returns. Now if we go to the other script, we're going to change this slightly, and we're going to do dot on invoke equals function, and inside here we're just going to return our buttons text. Alright, so whenever I click this button should copy the text of the right button. So yeah, it did work, and again, it's basically combining a bindable event with a remote function. Alright, so I'm going to go over a few common beginner mistakes. So the first one is trying to change leader stats or something similar to that from a local script. It'll never work because the leader stats are on the server side, first of all. And if you were to update it from the local script, it might be able to change on your perspective, as in the player's perspective, but everyone else's perspective, it won't be changed. It'll still remain the same as it was before you made that change. So for example, if you have two players and one of them changes the leader stats from a local script, the second player won't be able to see that change, simply because it's not replicated on the server to be passed to the second player. So the second mistake, and it's kind of like two mistakes in one, but you don't want to overuse remote events and remote functions because they do and will create lag on the server because the server is listening for so many messages and replying to so many things that it does, I guess, slow everything down. And the second part of that is if you can use a remote event instead of a remote function, always do that because a remote function is more costly than a remote event. And then the last mistake is just don't trust the client with any important data. That's why you use remote events and remote functions in the first place. So just a rule of thumb, important logic should remain on the server while player input and like I guess smashing buttons and stuff, that remains on the client, and connecting everything in between is with bindable events. So yeah, once you understand how to use those four tools, scripting games becomes way easier. Thanks for watching, and if you found this video helpful in any sort of way, please like and subscribe.